What if everything you believe about death is completely wrong? What if there existed an ancient book hidden for centuries that doesn't just talk about what happens after we die, but actually maps out the entire journey step by step? A book so detailed, so precise, that it reads like a GPS for the soul navigating the afterlife. Today, we're diving deep into one of humanity's most mysterious and profound texts. A book that has fascinated monks, mystified scientists, and challenged everything we think we know about consciousness, death, and what lies beyond. This isn't just another religious text gathering dust on ancient shelves. This is a guide that claims to reveal the exact process your consciousness goes through the moment your heart stops beating. And here's the truly mind-bending part. Modern near-death experience research is starting to confirm what this 1,000-year-old book has been saying all along. I'm talking about the Tibetan Book of the Dead, known in Tibet as the Bardo Thodol, which literally translates to liberation through hearing in the intermediate state. But don't let that title fool you. This book isn't just for the dying. It's a revolutionary manual for understanding consciousness, reality, and how to live with profound purpose and clarity. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this ancient text is being studied by neuroscientists at major universities, why psychologists are incorporating its teachings into therapy, and most importantly, how its wisdom can transform the way you approach every single day of your life. So settle in, because we're about to embark on a journey that will challenge your assumptions, expand your consciousness, and possibly change your entire perspective on what it means to be human. To understand the power of this mysterious book, we need to travel back over 1,000 years to the mystical highlands of Tibet. Picture snow, capped mountains piercing the clouds, ancient monasteries perched on impossible cliffs, and monks dedicating their entire lives to understanding the deepest mysteries of existence. The Tibetan Book of the Dead wasn't written by a single author sitting at a desk. Instead, it emerged from centuries of spiritual exploration, meditation, and direct experience with altered states of consciousness. The core teachings are attributed to Padmasambhava, an 8th century Indian Buddhist master who brought Buddhism to Tibet. But legend says he didn't just write these teachings down. He hid them. According to Tibetan tradition, Padmasambhava concealed these profound insights as tirma, hidden spiritual treasures, to be discovered when humanity was ready for them. These weren't hidden in caves or buried underground. They were hidden in the consciousness of future spiritual seekers, waiting to be remembered at exactly the right moment in history. The version we know today was revealed in the 14th century by Karma Lingpa, a Tibetan Turton or treasure revealer. Imagine the scene. Karma Lingpa, through deep meditation and spiritual insight, began to access these hidden teachings, writing them down in a state of profound spiritual revelation. It's as if the wisdom of the afterlife was downloaded directly into his consciousness from across the centuries. But here's where it gets really interesting. This wasn't just one person's spiritual fantasy or religious speculation. The teachings in the Bardo Thodol describe experiences that are remarkably consistent with what people report during near-death experiences, deep meditation states, and even certain psychedelic experiences. We're talking about descriptions of brilliant lights, encounters with spiritual beings, and the dissolution of ordinary reality, all documented in precise detail over 7 centuries ago. The book describes 3 intermediate states, or bardos, that consciousness experiences. The first is the bardo of the moment of death, where the clear light of pure awareness is said to shine. The second is the bardo of dharmata, where consciousness encounters various visions and spiritual beings. The third is the bardo of becoming, where the soul moves toward its next incarnation. What makes this so remarkable is the level of detail. This isn't vague poetry about angels and clouds. The Bardo Thodol provides specific instructions, precise timing, and detailed descriptions of what consciousness experiences at each stage. It's like having a detailed roadmap of territories that most people can only imagine. The text describes how consciousness gradually separates from the physical body, starting with the loss of the earth element, then water, fire, and air. It explains how awareness becomes increasingly subtle until it reaches the clear light state. Then it documents the entire process of how consciousness begins to encounter projections of its own mind. Peaceful deities representing enlightened qualities and wrathful deities representing unresolved psychological material. For centuries, this knowledge was transmitted orally from teacher to student in remote Tibetan monasteries. Monks would spend decades mastering these teachings, not just intellectually, but experientially through advanced meditation practices. They weren't just studying death from the outside. They were practicing dying while alive, learning to navigate these consciousness states through direct experience. When Western scholars first encountered this text in the early 20th century, they didn't know what to make of it. Here was a book that spoke with authority about realms of experience that Western science barely acknowledged existed. But as our understanding of consciousness has evolved, as we've developed more sophisticated research into near-death experiences, psychedelic states, and the nature of awareness itself, the Tibetan Book of the Dead has begun to look less like ancient superstition and more like an incredibly sophisticated map of consciousness. The question that haunts researchers today is this: how did Tibetan masters, over 1,000 years ago, develop such precise knowledge about states of consciousness that we're only beginning to study with our most advanced scientific instruments? What did they discover in their meditation halls and mountain retreats that allowed them to map the geography of death with such extraordinary detail? As we'll see, this ancient mystery isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a living guide that offers profound insights for anyone seeking to understand the deepest questions of human existence. The Tibetan Book of the Dead isn't just about preparing for death. It's about awakening to the true nature of consciousness itself. Now we're going to dive into the heart of this mysterious book: the three bardos, or intermediate states, that consciousness allegedly travels through after death. Think of these as three distinct territories in the landscape of the afterlife, each with its own characteristics, challenges, and opportunities. But here's something crucial to understand from the beginning. According to Tibetan Buddhist philosophy, these bardos aren't just something that happens after you die. They're states of consciousness that you can experience and even practice navigating while you're still alive. Every transition in life, every moment of change, every time you fall asleep and dream, these are all mini bardos, practice rounds for the ultimate journey. Let's start with the first bardo, the bardo of the moment of death, or Chakai bardo. Picture this: you're at the exact moment when your physical body can no longer sustain life. Your breathing has stopped, your heart has ceased beating. But according to the Tibetan teachings, your consciousness is more awake and aware than it has ever been. This isn't unconsciousness or oblivion. This is hyper-consciousness. The text describes this moment with incredible precision, as the physical elements of your body dissolve: earth, water, fire, air, and space. Your ordinary sense of self begins to dissolve as well. But instead of disappearing into nothingness, consciousness encounters what the text calls the clear light of reality, a brilliant, all-encompassing awareness that is said to be the fundamental nature of mind itself. This isn't just a metaphor or poetic language. The Bardo Thodol describes this light with specific characteristics. It's described as colorless light that is simultaneously empty and luminous, beyond all concepts and categories. It's not something you see with your eyes. It's the very nature of seeing itself. It's not something you think about. It's the space in which all thoughts arise and dissolve. Here's the incredible opportunity described in the text. If consciousness can recognize this clear light as its own true nature, if it can merge with this fundamental awareness without fear or grasping, it can achieve instant liberation. No more cycle of death and rebirth, no more suffering. Just pure, unlimited freedom. But here's the challenge. This moment lasts only an instant. The text says it's like lightning flashing in the sky. Brilliant, unmistakable, but gone before most people can recognize what they're seeing. For those who haven't prepared through spiritual practice, who haven't cultivated the ability to recognize the nature of their own awareness, this ultimate opportunity passes by unnoticed. This is why Tibetan Buddhists spend their entire lives preparing for this moment. Through advanced meditation practices, they learn to recognize the clear light of awareness in daily life, in deep sleep, and in dream states. They're essentially training to recognize the most important moment in their existence, the moment when ultimate freedom becomes possible. If consciousness doesn't recognize the clear light, or if it becomes afraid of the intensity of this experience, it moves into the second bardo, the bardo of dharmata, or the bardo of reality. This is where things get really wild. In this second stage, consciousness begins to encounter what the text describes as peaceful and wrathful deities, spiritual beings of incredible beauty and terrifying power. But here's the revolutionary insight of the Bardo Thodol. These beings aren't external entities judging your soul or determining your fate. They're projections of your own mind, reflections of your own psychological and spiritual development. The peaceful deities represent the enlightened aspects of your consciousness, your capacity for wisdom, compassion, clarity, and love. They appear as radiant beings of incredible beauty, emanating light and peace. The text describes 42 peaceful deities in total, each representing different aspects of awakened consciousness. Then come the wrathful deities, 58 powerful beings that can appear terrifying and overwhelming. But these aren't demons or evil spirits. They represent the fierce aspect of wisdom, the power that cuts through illusion and delusion. They also represent your own unresolved psychological material, your fears, anger, attachments, and hidden desires, manifested in symbolic form. What makes this so psychologically sophisticated is the recognition that both peaceful and wrathful experiences are projections of mind. The goal isn't to avoid the wrathful deities and cling to the peaceful ones. The goal is to recognize that both are empty appearances, neither ultimately real nor unreal, but simply the natural radiance of consciousness expressing itself. The text provides detailed instructions for navigating these visions. It describes exactly what each deity looks like, what they represent, and how to respond to them. For each encounter, the guidance is the same. Recognize these appearances as projections of your own mind. Neither grasp at them nor flee from them, but remain in the open awareness that is your true nature. This second bardo can last up to 14 days according to the text, though time in these states doesn't follow ordinary rules. It's a period of incredible intensity where consciousness has the opportunity to work through lifetimes of psychological and spiritual material in a highly concentrated form. If consciousness can navigate this bardo successfully, recognizing all appearances as mind and maintaining awareness without getting caught up in the drama of the visions, it can still achieve liberation. But if it becomes overwhelmed, if it starts believing that these visions are externally real and reacts to them with fear, desire, or aversion, it moves into the third bardo. The bardo of becoming, or Sidpa bardo, is the final stage before rebirth. In this state, consciousness is no longer encountering the profound spiritual opportunities of the first two bardos. Instead, it's being drawn inexorably toward a new incarnation based on its karmic momentum. The accumulated patterns of thought, emotion, and action from its previous life. This is described as a highly charged, chaotic state where consciousness experiences intense desires and aversions. It's drawn toward potential parents based on its karmic connections and psychological patterns. The text describes this as a kind of magnetic attraction. Consciousness is pulled toward the life situation that most closely matches its current state of development. What's remarkable about these descriptions is how they parallel modern research into consciousness, near-death experiences, and even psychedelic states. People who have had near-death experiences often report encounters with brilliant light, meetings with spiritual beings, and life reviews that seem to parallel the bardos described in this ancient text. But perhaps most importantly, the Bardo Thotl presents these states not as fixed destinations, but as opportunities. Every Bardo offers the possibility of awakening, of recognizing the true nature of consciousness and achieving freedom. The text is ultimately optimistic. It suggests that no matter how far consciousness travels into these post-death states, the potential for liberation is always present. This is why the book isn't just for the dying. By understanding these states and learning to recognize them in daily life, in dreams, in meditation, in moments of transition and change, we can prepare ourselves for the ultimate journey while simultaneously awakening to the true nature of our minds right now. Let's focus now on what the Tibetan Book of the Dead describes as the most crucial moment in human existence. The instant when consciousness separates from the physical body and encounters the clear light of reality. This isn't just another stage in the afterlife journey. According to the text, this is the ultimate opportunity for liberation that surpasses anything possible during ordinary life. Imagine being at the threshold between worlds. Your physical senses have shut down. Your body can no longer sustain life, but your consciousness is more alive and aware than it has ever been. This is the paradox described in the Bardo Thotl, that the moment of death isn't the end of awareness, but potentially its most profound revelation. The text describes this process with remarkable precision. As death approaches, consciousness goes through what's called the dissolution of the elements. First, the earth element dissolves. You lose control over your body, feeling heavy and unable to move. Then the water element dissolves. Bodily fluids dry up. You lose control over saliva and other secretions. The fire element dissolves next. Body temperature drops and you lose the ability to digest anything. Then the air element dissolves. Breathing becomes labored and eventually stops. But according to the Bardo Thotl, this is just the beginning. After the gross physical elements dissolve, consciousness goes through even subtler stages of dissolution. The text describes this as the dissolving of thought patterns, emotions, and even the basic sense of subject and object, self and other. What emerges from this complete dissolution is what the text calls the Mother Clear Light, the fundamental nature of consciousness itself, beyond all concepts, categories, and ordinary experience. This isn't described as something you see or experience in the normal sense. It's described as the very nature of awareness itself. Luminous, empty, beyond birth and death, beyond all the dualities that characterize ordinary experience. The text describes this clear light with specific characteristics that are both profound and paradoxical. It's said to be colorless light, not the absence of color, but beyond all colors, while being the source of all colors. It's described as naked awareness, consciousness without any object, pure knowing without anything known. It's unobstructed. Nothing can block it or limit it because it's the space in which all experiences arise and dissolve. Here's where the teaching becomes truly revolutionary. This clear light isn't something foreign or external to you. According to the Bardo Thotl, this is your true nature, the deepest essence of what you are. Throughout your entire life, this clear light awareness has been present, but it's been obscured by thoughts, emotions, sensations, and the constant activity of ordinary consciousness. Death, in this view, isn't the end of who you are. It's the removal of everything that isn't essentially you. It's like clouds partying to reveal the sun that was always shining behind them. The clear light was always there. Death simply removes the temporary obstructions that prevented you from recognizing it. The text provides specific instructions for this crucial moment. When the clear light dawns, the guidance is to recognize it as your own awareness and merge with it without fear or grasping. The text emphasizes that this isn't about doing something or achieving something. It's about recognizing what is already present and always has been. But here's the challenge that makes this moment so poignant. According to the teachings, this recognition must be instantaneous. The clear light dawns like lightning in the sky, brilliant, unmistakable, but lasting only a moment before the mind begins to generate new experiences and visions. If consciousness doesn't recognize the clear light immediately, if it doesn't merge with it in that instant, the opportunity passes and consciousness moves into the next bardo. This is why Tibetan Buddhist practitioners spend their entire lives preparing for this moment. They don't wait until death to encounter the clear light for the first time. Through advanced meditation practices, they learn to recognize this same awareness in daily life, in deep sleep, and in dream states. One of the most important practices is called clear light meditation, where practitioners learn to rest in pure awareness without any object or focus. They practice recognizing the space, light quality of mind that remains present whether thoughts are arising or not, whether emotions are present or absent. This is training for the ultimate recognition. Another crucial practice is working with the dissolution process itself. Advanced practitioners actually rehearse dying through visualization and meditation, familiarizing themselves with each stage of dissolution, so that when it happens for real, they're not caught off guard by the unfamiliar territory. The text also emphasizes the importance of receiving proper instruction about the clear light while you're still healthy and alive. There's a famous line in the Bardo Thodol that says, "Now when the bardo of dying dawns upon me, I will abandon grasping, yearning, and attachment. Enter undistracted into clear awareness of the teaching and eject my consciousness into the space of unborn awareness." This isn't just poetic language. It's a precise instruction manual for the most important moment of your existence. The space of unborn awareness refers to the clear light that was never born and can never die. The fundamental nature of consciousness that transcends both life and death. What makes this teaching so remarkable is its claim that enlightenment, complete spiritual liberation, is possible in a single instant. Not through years of meditation, not through accumulating merit or good karma, but through a single moment of recognition at the time of death. This is sometimes called the path of the moment. The possibility of complete awakening in the space of a single instant. But the text is also realistic about the challenges. It acknowledges that most people, even those who have received the teachings, will not be able to recognize the clear light when it dawns. This isn't because they're bad people or because they haven't tried hard enough. It's because recognizing your own true nature requires a level of familiarity with awareness itself that takes considerable preparation. This is why the book includes instructions not just for the dying person, but for guides and teachers who can read the text aloud during the death process. Even if the dying person can't recognize the clear light themselves, hearing the instructions at the crucial moment might trigger the recognition. What's fascinating about these descriptions is how they parallel reports from people who have had near-death experiences. Many describe encountering a brilliant light that feels more real than ordinary reality, a light that somehow communicates unconditional love and acceptance. They often say that this light felt like coming home or recognizing their true nature. Scientific research into near-death experiences has documented remarkably consistent reports across different cultures and belief systems. People describe moving toward a brilliant light, feeling a profound sense of peace and unity, and sometimes reluctantly returning to their physical bodies. While science hasn't proven the reality of these experiences, the consistency of the reports is striking. The Tibetan Book of the Dead suggests that these experiences aren't just hallucinations or brain chemistry. They're glimpses of the clear light of consciousness that is our deepest nature. Whether you believe this literally or metaphorically, the teaching offers a profound perspective on the nature of death and consciousness. Perhaps most importantly, this teaching about the clear light transforms how we might approach our own mortality. Instead of seeing death as the ultimate defeat or tragedy, the Bardo Thodol presents it as the ultimate opportunity, the moment when the deepest truth about our nature becomes most available. This doesn't mean we should be eager for death or minimize the genuine grief and loss that death brings. But it does suggest that preparing for death consciously and courageously might be one of the most important things we can do in life. By learning to recognize the clear light awareness in meditation and daily life, we're not just preparing for a good death, we're awakening to who we truly are right now. Now we enter the most visually spectacular and psychologically profound section of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the detailed descriptions of the peaceful and wrathful deities that consciousness encounters in the second bardo. These aren't just abstract spiritual concepts. The text provides incredibly detailed descriptions of exactly what these beings look like, how they appear, and what they represent. But before we dive into these remarkable visions, we need to understand the revolutionary psychological insight at the heart of these teachings. These deities aren't external beings that exist independently in some afterlife realm. They're projections of your own mind, symbolic representations of different aspects of your own consciousness and psychological development. This is what makes the Bardo Thotl so psychologically sophisticated. Written over 1,000 years ago, it presents an understanding of the psyche that parallels modern depth psychology. These visions are like a cosmic mirror, reflecting back everything you carry within your mind. Your enlightened potentials, your unresolved traumas, your hidden fears, and your deepest aspirations. Let's begin with the peaceful deities, which appear first in this bardo. The text describes 42 peaceful deities in total, each representing different aspects of enlightened consciousness. These beings appear over a period of 7 days, with different deities manifesting each day. On the first day, consciousness encounters Buddha Vairocana, described as brilliant blue, white in color, sitting on a lion throne, holding a wheel, the symbol of teaching. He represents the wisdom of the Dharma Dhatu, the fundamental space of reality itself. He appears surrounded by radiant light, so brilliant that many consciousnesses cannot bear to look directly at him. Here's the crucial instruction given in the text. Do not be afraid of this light. Do not flee from it. Recognize it as your own awareness and merge with it. The text explains that if consciousness can recognize this brilliant blue, white light as the radiance of its own awakened nature, liberation is achieved instantly. But the text also acknowledges the psychological challenge. Due to negative karma and strong habitual patterns, you may feel afraid of this brilliant light and flee from it. Instead, you may feel attracted to the soft, dull light of the hell realm. This represents the tendency to avoid our own enlightened potential because it seems too intense, too unfamiliar, and instead gravitate toward familiar patterns of suffering. On the second day, Buddha Akshobhya appears, brilliant white in color, holding a vajra representing mirror, like wisdom, the ability to see things exactly as they are without distortion. Again, the instruction is the same. Recognize this as your own awareness and merge with it. This pattern continues for 7 days, with different Buddha families appearing: Ratnasum, Bhava, Amitabha, and Amigasiddhi. Each represents a different aspect of enlightened consciousness, and each offers the opportunity for liberation. If consciousness can recognize the vision as its own nature, what's psychologically brilliant about this sequence is that it presents enlightenment not as a single, monolithic experience, but as having different flavors and qualities. The peaceful deities represent the various ways that awakened consciousness can manifest: as clarity, as compassion, as wisdom, as skillful action. But the text is realistic about human psychology. It acknowledges that many consciousnesses will be overwhelmed by these brilliant visions of their own enlightened potential. The light is too bright, the experience too intense, too unfamiliar. Instead of recognizing these visions as their own nature, they flee from them. This is where the wrathful deities enter the picture. On the 8th day, the peaceful visions give way to much more intense and potentially terrifying experiences. The text describes 58 wrathful deities appearing over the next 7 days, beings of incredible power and fierce appearance that can seem absolutely terrifying to unprepared consciousness. But here's the crucial understanding. These wrathful deities aren't evil or demonic. They're the same enlightened awareness as the peaceful deities, but manifesting in a different form. They represent the fierce aspect of wisdom, the power that cuts through illusion, the compassionate wrath that destroys ignorance and suffering. The descriptions of these wrathful deities are incredibly detailed and vivid. Take Mahotara Haruka, one of the principal wrathful deities. He's described as dark blue in color, with 3 faces and 6 arms. His main face is blue, his right face is white, his left face is red. He has 9 eyes, bared fangs, and hair standing on end. He holds various symbolic implements in his 6 hands and is surrounded by flames. He's embracing his consort, and together they dance in the midst of blazing fire. To an unprepared consciousness, this vision could be absolutely terrifying. But the text provides the key to understanding. Do not be afraid. This is your own awareness appearing in wrathful form. These are your own projections. They cannot harm you because they are empty of inherent existence. The wrathful deities represent several important psychological and spiritual functions. First, they embody the fierce aspect of compassion, the willingness to destroy whatever causes suffering, even if that destruction appears frightening. Second, they represent the power of transformation, the ability of consciousness to break through rigid patterns and limitations. Third, they mirror back the unresolved psychological material that consciousness carries. Fears, anger, attachments, and desires that need to be integrated or transcended. Each wrathful deity has specific symbolic meanings. Their multiple faces represent the ability to see in all directions simultaneously, complete awareness. Their many arms represent the capacity for unlimited skillful action. Their fierce expressions represent the determination to overcome all obstacles to awakening. Their naked bodies represent the direct, undecorated truth beyond all cultural and conceptual coverings. The sexual imagery. Many wrathful deities are shown in union with consorts, represents the integration of wisdom and compassion, the masculine and feminine aspects of consciousness united in perfect balance. This isn't literal sexuality, but symbolic representation of psychological wholeness. What makes these teachings so psychologically profound is their recognition that both peaceful and wrathful experiences are necessary for complete awakening. You can't just cultivate the gentle, peaceful aspects of consciousness while avoiding the fierce, transformative energies. True enlightenment requires integrating both. The text provides specific instructions for working with these wrathful visions. Recognize them as your own projections. Do not fear them or be attracted to them. Rest in the awareness that recognizes both peaceful and wrathful appearances as empty displays of your own mind. This is remarkably similar to modern therapeutic approaches that encourage people to own their projections, to recognize that what they see in others often reflects what they carry within themselves. The Bardo Thotl is essentially providing a cosmic scale version of this psychological insight. Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, was deeply influenced by the Tibetan Book of the Dead. He recognized in these teachings a sophisticated understanding of what he called the shadow, the repressed or unacknowledged aspects of the psyche. Jung wrote that the gods and demons of the Bardo Thotl represent autonomous complexes within the unconscious mind. But the Tibetan teaching goes beyond just psychological integration. It presents these visions as opportunities for liberation. If consciousness can maintain awareness while encountering both peaceful and wrathful deities, neither grasping at the pleasant visions nor fleeing from the frightening ones, it can achieve freedom from the entire cycle of psychological reactivity. This has profound implications for how we might work with intense experiences in daily life. Every time we encounter something that triggers strong reactions, whether positive or negative, we have an opportunity to practice the same awareness that the Bardo Thotl recommends for navigating the afterlife visions. When you feel overwhelmed by beauty or joy, can you appreciate it without grasping? When you encounter fear or anger, can you experience it fully without being controlled by it? These are the same skills that the text says are crucial for navigating the Bardo visions. The ultimate message of this section is both challenging and liberating. Everything you encounter, whether in life or death, is a projection of your own mind. This doesn't mean that external reality doesn't exist, but it does mean that your experience of reality is always filtered through your own consciousness. By learning to recognize this, by developing the ability to remain aware in the midst of intense experiences, you can achieve a kind of psychological and spiritual freedom that transcends both life and death. The peaceful and wrathful deities aren't just ancient mythology or religious symbolism. They're a sophisticated map of the human psyche, presented in a form that acknowledges both the beautiful and terrifying aspects of our own inner worlds. By understanding these teachings, we gain insight not just into what might happen after death, but into the nature of consciousness itself. Now we're going to explore one of the most fascinating aspects of the Tibetan Book of the Dead: how its ancient descriptions of death and consciousness are being validated and expanded by cutting-edge scientific research. What's emerging is a remarkable convergence between thousands-year-old Tibetan wisdom and modern neuroscience, psychology, and consciousness studies. Let's start with near-death experience research, which has documented thousands of cases of people who have been clinically dead. No heartbeat, no brain activity, and yet report profound conscious experiences during this time. What's remarkable is how closely these modern reports match the stages described in the Bardo Thotl. Dr. Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death experience in the 1970s, identified several common elements in these reports. The out-of-body experience, moving through a tunnel toward a bright light, encountering spiritual beings, experiencing a life review, and feeling profound peace and unconditional love. These elements correspond remarkably well to the stages described in the first two bardos of the Tibetan text. Consider the consistency of the light experience. In the Bardo Thotl, the clear light is described as brilliant beyond description, yet completely peaceful and loving. Near-death experiencers consistently report encountering a light that they describe as more real than real, filled with unconditional love and acceptance. They often say that this light communicated with them without words, conveying complete understanding and acceptance. Dr. Pim van Lommel, a Dutch cardiologist, conducted one of the most rigorous scientific studies of near-death experiences. He studied 344 cardiac arrest patients who had been resuscitated and found that 18% reported having near-death experiences during the time when their brains showed no measurable activity. These patients reported enhanced consciousness, not diminished awareness, during clinical death. What's particularly intriguing is how these experiences transform people's lives afterward. Like the liberation promised in the Bardo Thotl, people who have near-death experiences often report losing their fear of death, developing greater compassion, and experiencing a profound shift in their priorities and values. They frequently describe feeling that they've encountered their true nature or deepest essence. Neuroscientist Dr. Eben Alexander, who had his own near-death experience during a week-long coma caused by bacterial meningitis, describes encountering realms of consciousness that perfectly match the Bardo descriptions. He writes about moving through different levels of reality, encountering loving spiritual beings, and experiencing consciousness that was far more vivid and real than ordinary waking awareness. But the scientific validation goes beyond just near-death experiences. Research into psychedelic states has revealed remarkably similar territory. Studies with substances like psilocybin, LSD, and DMT consistently produce experiences that parallel the Bardo descriptions. Encounters with spiritual beings, dissolution of the ego, experiences of cosmic consciousness, and confrontations with both beautiful and terrifying visions. Dr. Rick Strassman's research with DMT at the University of New Mexico revealed that this naturally occurring psychedelic consistently produces encounters with what users describe as autonomous spiritual beings. These entities often appear as radiant, loving figures or as more challenging, sometimes frightening presences, very similar to the peaceful and wrathful deities described in the Bardo Thodol. What's particularly interesting is that many people describe these psychedelic encounters as feeling more real than real, the same phrase commonly used by near-death experiencers. This suggests that both states might be accessing similar territories of consciousness, the same realms mapped out in the ancient Tibetan text. Recent neuroscience research has also provided insights into the dissolution process described in the Bardo Thodol. When the brain begins to shut down, either through death or psychedelic influence, the default mode network, the brain network associated with the sense of self, becomes less active. This corresponds to the ego dissolution described in both the Bardos and in psychedelic experiences. Dr. Robin Carhart Harris at Imperial College London has used brain imaging to study what happens during psychedelic experiences. His research shows that as the default mode network becomes less active, people report experiences of unity, transcendence, and encounters with spiritual dimensions, experiences that closely match the Bardo descriptions. The timing described in the Bardo Thodol also finds some support in modern research. The text says that consciousness can remain aware for up to 20 minutes after clinical death, during which the clear light experience occurs. Recent research has found that brain activity can continue for several minutes after the heart stops, and some cellular activity continues even longer. Dr. Sam Parnea, who leads the AWARE study, the world's largest investigation into near-death experiences, has documented cases where people reported detailed conscious experiences during periods when their brains should have been completely inactive. This suggests that consciousness might indeed persist beyond the point of clinical death, just as the Bardo Thodol claims. Even more intriguing is research into terminal lucidity, cases where people with severe dementia or brain damage suddenly become completely lucid and aware shortly before death. This phenomenon, documented by researchers like Dr. Michael Nahm, suggests that consciousness might not be entirely dependent on brain function, supporting the Tibetan teaching that awareness can become clearer and more vivid at the moment of death. The psychological insights of the Bardo Thodol are also finding validation in modern therapy. The text's understanding that our projections reveal our inner psychological state is now fundamental to many therapeutic approaches. Jungian analysis, in particular, works extensively with the idea that the figures we encounter in dreams and active imagination reflect aspects of our own psyche. Dr. Stanislav Graf, who has conducted extensive research into non-ordinary states of consciousness, has documented thousands of cases where people encounter archetypal figures that closely resemble the peaceful and wrathful deities described in the Bardo Thodol. His research with psychedelic therapy and holotropic breathwork has revealed that people consistently encounter both benevolent and challenging spiritual figures that seem to represent different aspects of their own psyche. What's particularly striking is how Graf's research validates the Tibetan teaching that these encounters offer opportunities for healing and transformation. People who learn to face the challenging figures with awareness and courage often experience profound psychological breakthroughs, while those who flee in fear often remain stuck in their patterns. The field of consciousness studies has also begun to take seriously the possibility that consciousness might not be produced by the brain, but rather received or focused by it. This theory, known as the transmission or filter theory of consciousness, suggests that the brain acts more like a radio receiver than a generator of consciousness. If this is true, then it's possible that consciousness could continue after the brain stops functioning. Just as the Bardo Thodol claims, researchers like Dr. Pim van Lommel and Dr. Bruce Grayson have argued that the evidence from near-death experiences supports this transmission theory. They point out that during cardiac arrest, when the brain shows no measurable activity, people report the most vivid and coherent conscious experiences of their lives. This is the opposite of what we would expect if consciousness were simply a product of brain activity. The quantum physics revolution has also opened new possibilities for understanding consciousness that align with Tibetan teachings. Some physicists, like Dr. Stuart Hameroff and Sir Roger Penrose, have proposed that consciousness might be a fundamental feature of the universe, not just an emergent property of complex brains. Their orchestrated objective reduction theory suggests that consciousness operates at the quantum level within the microtubules of brain cells. While these theories remain controversial, they at least make it scientifically conceivable that consciousness could have properties that transcend ordinary physical processes. This creates space for seriously considering the possibility that the detailed observations in the Bardo Thodol might be based on actual experiences rather than just religious imagination. Perhaps most importantly, modern research is validating the practical applications of the Bardo Thodol's teachings. Studies have shown that people who engage in death preparation practices, meditation, contemplation of impermanence, and psychological preparation for death, experience less anxiety, greater life satisfaction, and more peaceful death processes. Dr. Thanissaro Bhikkhu's research into Buddhist death practices has shown that people who prepare for death using techniques similar to those described in the Bardo Thodol report, feeling more at peace with mortality and experience less death anxiety. This suggests that regardless of what literally happens after death, the practices recommended in the text have measurable benefits for the living. The emerging field of psychedelic assisted therapy is also beginning to incorporate insights from the Bardo Thodol. Therapists working with substances like psilocybin for end of life anxiety are finding that the Tibetan teachings provide valuable frameworks for helping people navigate challenging psychedelic experiences and integrate them into their lives. Dr. Roland Griffiths at Johns Hopkins has conducted groundbreaking research showing that a single psilocybin experience can dramatically reduce death anxiety in cancer patients and increase their sense of meaning and spiritual well-being. The experiences people report in these studies: encounters with loving presences, dissolution of ego boundaries, and profound insights into the nature of consciousness, closely parallel the liberation experiences described in the Bardos. What's emerging from all this research is a picture of consciousness that is far more complex and mysterious than the materialist view that dominated science for the past century. While we still don't have definitive proof of survival after death, we have compelling evidence that consciousness can operate in ways that transcend ordinary brain function. This convergence of ancient wisdom and modern science doesn't prove that the Bardo Thodol is literally accurate in all its details. But it does suggest that the Tibetan masters who composed this text had profound insights into the nature of consciousness that we're only beginning to understand with our scientific instruments. Perhaps most importantly, this research is validating the core insight of the Bardo Thodol: that consciousness is far more fundamental and mysterious than we typically assume, and that preparing for death consciously can be one of the most important and transformative practices we can undertake in life. The ancient Tibetan teaching that death is not the end, but a transformation is beginning to look less like wishful thinking and more like a sophisticated understanding of consciousness that science is gradually catching up to. Whether or not consciousness literally survives death, the practices and insights described in the Bardo Thodol offer profound tools for living with greater awareness, courage, and compassion. Now let's explore how the profound teachings of the Tibetan Book of the Dead can be applied in practical ways to enhance both how we live and how we prepare for death. This isn't just theoretical philosophy. These are concrete practices that have been tested and refined over centuries by thousands of practitioners. The first and perhaps most important practice is what Tibetan Buddhists call contemplation of impermanence. This involves regularly reflecting on the fact that death is inevitable, that the timing is uncertain, and that nothing we accumulate in life can ultimately protect us from this final transition. While this might sound morbid to modern ears, practitioners report that this contemplation actually makes life more vivid, precious, and meaningful. Here's how you can begin this practice. Each morning when you wake up, Spend a few minutes reflecting on the fact that this day is not guaranteed. You don't know if you'll be alive this evening, next week, or next year. This isn't meant to create anxiety, but to cultivate appreciation for the preciousness of each moment. Notice how this awareness shifts your priorities. Do the arguments you were planning to have seem as important? Do the achievements you're striving for feel as urgent? The Dalai Lama has said that he contemplates death several times each day, not out of morbidity, but because it helps him focus on what truly matters. He reports that this practice makes him more compassionate, more present, and less attached to temporary concerns. When you truly understand that your time is limited, every interaction becomes more precious, every moment of beauty more vivid. Another foundational practice is developing familiarity with the clear light of awareness through meditation. The Bardo Thodol emphasizes that the key to recognizing the clear light at death is becoming familiar with it during life. This doesn't require years of intensive retreat practice. It can begin with simple awareness exercises. Try this. Sit quietly and notice the awareness that is noticing your thoughts, emotions, and sensations. This awareness itself, not its contents, but the knowing quality that recognizes whatever arises, is what the text refers to as the clear light. It's always present, whether you're thinking or not thinking, feeling happy or sad, experiencing pleasure or pain. Practice resting in this awareness for short periods, gradually extending the time as you become more familiar with it. Advanced practitioners learn to recognize this same clear light awareness in dream states and deep sleep. This practice, called dream yoga, involves becoming lucid in dreams and using the dream state as practice for navigating the bardos. When you realize you're dreaming while still in the dream, you can practice transforming the dream images, recognizing them as projections of mind, and maintaining awareness throughout the experience. The text also emphasizes the importance of cultivating what Tibetans call bodhicitta, the compassionate intention to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. This isn't just a nice sentiment, it's a practical preparation for death. When consciousness is motivated by genuine compassion rather than self-concern, it's much more likely to recognize the clear light and achieve liberation. You can cultivate bodhicitta through the practice of Tonglen, or giving and receiving. This involves breathing in the suffering of others and breathing out relief and happiness. It sounds counterintuitive. Why would you want to take on more suffering? But practitioners report that this practice actually increases their capacity for joy and reduces their sense of separation from others. Here's a simple Tonglen practice. Think of someone who is suffering, perhaps someone you know who is dealing with illness, loss, or difficulty. As you breathe in, imagine taking their pain into your heart. As you breathe out, send them whatever they need: healing, peace, love, or strength. This practice breaks down the artificial boundary between self and other, preparing consciousness for the ego dissolution that occurs in the bardos. The Bardo Thodol also recommends specific visualizations for preparing for death. One of the most important is called Phowa, or consciousness transference. This practice involves learning to project your consciousness upward and out of the body through the crown of the head. While this might sound esoteric, it's actually a form of mental training that helps develop the ability to direct consciousness intentionally. The basic Phowa practice involves visualizing your consciousness as a small sphere of light in your heart. Through visualization and mantra recitation, you practice shooting this sphere of light up through your central channel and out through the crown of your head, merging with enlightened awareness above. With practice, some people report being able to actually feel this movement of consciousness and even develop physical signs like a small opening or tender spot at the crown of their head. Another crucial preparation is working with fear. The Bardo Thodol repeatedly emphasizes that fear is the main obstacle to recognizing the clear light and achieving liberation. Fear causes consciousness to flee from its own enlightened nature and become trapped in cyclic patterns of rebirth. You can work with fear by gradually exposing yourself to challenging situations while maintaining awareness. This doesn't mean seeking out dangerous situations, but rather staying present when you encounter natural difficulties in life. When you feel afraid, instead of immediately trying to escape or distract yourself, try staying with the experience of fear itself. Notice how it feels in your body, what thoughts arise, how your breathing changes. Practice remaining aware and calm in the presence of fear. The text also recommends working with anger, attachment, and other strong emotions in the same way. These emotions, when encountered in the bardos, manifest as the wrathful deities. If you've learned to remain aware and unshaken by strong emotions in life, you'll be better prepared to navigate their intensified appearances in the afterlife states. Many Western practitioners are incorporating these teachings into practical death preparation. Dr. Joan Halifax, who founded the project on Being with Dying, teaches healthcare workers and family members how to be present with dying people using principles from the Bardo Thotl. She emphasizes the importance of creating calm, supportive environments for dying and reading spiritual teachings aloud during the death process. The text itself provides specific instructions for guides who are helping someone die. It recommends reading the Bardo instructions aloud to the dying person, describing each stage as it occurs and encouraging them to recognize the clear light. Even if the person seems unconscious, the text suggests that consciousness can still hear and benefit from these instructions. Modern hospice workers have found that incorporating these approaches can make an enormous difference in how people experience death. Instead of dying in fear and confusion, people who receive this kind of spiritual guidance often experience peaceful, even blissful deaths. You can prepare for this role by studying the Bardo Thotl yourself and practicing reading the instructions aloud. Many practitioners memorize key passages so they can recite them without needing to consult a book. The simple act of providing spiritual guidance to someone who is dying is considered one of the most compassionate acts possible in Tibetan Buddhism. Perhaps most importantly, the text emphasizes that all of these practices should be integrated into daily life. You don't need to wait until you're on your deathbed to begin working with these teachings. Every moment of change, every transition, every experience of letting go is an opportunity to practice the awareness that will be crucial at the time of death. Think about the little deaths you experience regularly: falling asleep each night, waking up each morning, the end of relationships, changing jobs, moving to new places. Each of these transitions can be approached as practice for the ultimate transition. Can you let go gracefully? Can you remain aware in the midst of uncertainty? Can you find peace in the space between what was and what's coming next? The Bardo Thotl suggests that if you can learn to navigate these smaller transitions with awareness and equanimity, you'll be much better prepared for the final transition. Death, in this view, isn't fundamentally different from any other change. It's just more complete and final. This perspective can be incredibly liberating. Instead of seeing death as something to fear and avoid thinking about, you can approach it as the ultimate adventure, the final frontier of consciousness exploration. By preparing for death consciously, you're not just ensuring a better death. You're learning to live with greater awareness, courage, and compassion. The practical applications of these teachings extend far beyond personal preparation. Understanding the Bardos can transform how we support dying family members and friends. It can influence how we design end-of-life care systems. It can even change how we approach major life transitions and challenges. When you understand that consciousness is far more vast and resilient than you might have imagined, when you've prepared for the ultimate journey through meditation and contemplation, you develop a kind of fearless confidence that affects every aspect of your life. You're not just preparing to die well. You're learning to live with the awareness that comes from touching the deepest mysteries of existence. One of the most distinctive and powerful aspects of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is that it's not meant to be read silently by scholars or practitioners. It's designed to be read aloud to people who are dying or who have recently died. This practice, which has continued for over 1,000 years, is based on the belief that consciousness can still hear and benefit from spiritual guidance even after clinical death. Imagine the scene. In traditional Tibetan culture, When someone is approaching death, a lama or experienced practitioner sits beside their bed with a bardo thottle in hand. As the person's breathing becomes labored and their body begins to shut down, the reader begins reciting the instructions for navigating the first bardo, the moment of death itself. The reader speaks directly to the dying person's consciousness. "O son, daughter of noble family, listen carefully. The pure light of the void, your true nature, is now appearing before you. Recognize it. This clear light is your own mind. Rest in this state. This isn't just ceremonial comfort for the living." According to Tibetan teachings, consciousness doesn't immediately depart from the body at the moment of clinical death. Instead, it remains connected for a period of time, potentially up to several days, during which it can still perceive sounds and receive spiritual instruction. The reader's voice becomes a lifeline, guiding consciousness through territories that would otherwise be navigated alone and unprepared. The practice continues for up to 49 days after death, corresponding to the maximum time consciousness is believed to spend in the bardos before taking rebirth. Each day, different instructions are read corresponding to the visions and experiences consciousness is believed to be encountering at that stage of its journey. On the first day after death, the reader announces, "Today, the Buddha Vairocana will appear to you in brilliant blue, white light. Do not be afraid of this light. Do not flee from it. This is the light of your own awakened nature. If you can recognize this and merge with it, you will be liberated instantly." As the days progress, the instructions become more detailed and specific. When the wrathful deities begin to appear, the reader provides descriptions of exactly what consciousness will encounter. Today, the great, glorious Buddha, Heruka, will appear. He is dark blue in color, with 3 faces and 6 arms. Do not be terrified by his fierce appearance. He is your own awareness appearing in wrathful form. These visions cannot harm you because they are empty of inherent existence. What makes this practice so remarkable is its psychological sophistication. The reader isn't just describing random religious imagery. They're providing a detailed roadmap for navigating complex psychological territories, helping consciousness recognize its own projections and maintain awareness in the midst of overwhelming experiences. Modern research into consciousness and near-death experiences has found intriguing support for some aspects of this practice. Studies have documented cases where clinically dead patients later reported hearing conversations that occurred around their bodies. Dr. Pim van Klam's research included several cases where patients accurately reported details of conversations and events that occurred while they showed no brain activity. One particularly striking case involved a patient whose dentures were removed during resuscitation. When he regained consciousness days later, he accurately described who had removed his dentures and where they had been placed, even though this occurred while he was clinically dead. This suggests that some form of consciousness or awareness might indeed persist beyond clinical death. Just as the Tibetan teachings claim, the reading practice also serves important functions for the living. It provides family members with a meaningful way to participate in their loved one's death process. Instead of feeling helpless in the face of death, they become active participants in what's understood to be the most important journey of that person's existence. Dr. Joan Halifax, who has adapted these practices for Western contexts, describes how reading to dying patients can create profound peace and connection. Even when patients seem unconscious, family members often report sensing that their words are being received. The act of reading spiritual instructions aloud creates a sacred container around the death process, transforming what could be a time of fear and confusion into an opportunity for spiritual connection. The specific instructions provided in the Bardo Thottle are remarkably detailed and practical. For each stage of the journey, the text provides exact descriptions of what consciousness will encounter, explanations of what these visions mean, and specific guidance for how to respond. When consciousness encounters the peaceful deities, the reader provides encouragement. These beautiful beings of light are not separate from you. They are the radiance of your own enlightened nature. Do not be overwhelmed by their brilliance. Do not worship them as external gods. Recognize them as your own awareness and merge with them. When the wrathful deities appear, the guidance shifts to address the natural fear response. Do not be terrified by these fierce figures. They are not demons coming to harm you. They are your own unresolved psychological patterns appearing in symbolic form. They are also your own wisdom appearing in its fierce, transformative aspect. Neither flee from them nor fight against them. Simply recognize them as empty appearances of your own mind. As consciousness moves into the third bardo, approaching rebirth, the instructions become focused on helping maintain awareness and positive intention. You will see visions of potential parents engaged in sexual union. Do not be attracted or repulsed by these visions. If you must take rebirth, choose parents who are virtuous and will provide opportunities for spiritual development. But better still, recognize that these visions too are projections of your mind and rest in pure awareness. The reading practice requires considerable skill and training. The reader must understand not just the words, but the psychological and spiritual principles behind them. They need to read with confidence and authority, providing a stable, reassuring presence in the midst of what may be very turbulent experiences for the dying person's consciousness. Traditional training for Bardo readers is extensive. Students spend years studying the text, learning to visualize the deities described, and developing the meditation skills that allow them to remain calm and centered while dealing with death. They practice reading the instructions aloud until they can recite large portions from memory, ensuring that they can provide guidance even in challenging circumstances. The reader also needs to adapt their approach to the specific person who is dying. Someone with extensive meditation experience might need less detailed explanation and more encouragement to apply their training. Someone who is unfamiliar with Buddhist concepts might need more basic explanations and reassurance. Modern adaptations of this practice have been developed for different cultural contexts. Some Western practitioners create personalized versions of the Bardo reading that incorporate language and imagery, more familiar to contemporary minds while preserving the essential psychological insights. Others use the traditional text but provide additional explanation and context. The key principles remain the same regardless of the specific format, providing spiritual guidance during the death process, helping consciousness recognize its own nature, and offering a framework for understanding the experiences that may arise during the transition from life to death. Some hospitals and hospice organizations have begun incorporating modified versions of these practices into their care protocols. While they don't necessarily endorse the specific religious beliefs involved, they recognize that providing spiritual guidance during death can significantly improve the experience for both patients and families. Research into the effectiveness of spiritual intervention during the death process is still in its early stages, but preliminary studies suggest positive effects. Patients who receive spiritual guidance during dying often show less agitation, more peaceful facial expressions, and what appears to be more comfortable deaths. Perhaps most importantly, the practice of reading to the dying reminds us that death doesn't have to be a solitary journey. Even when medical intervention is no longer possible, spiritual guidance and support can continue. The voice of a skilled reader becomes a bridge between worlds, offering comfort and direction during what may be the most important transition of human existence. Whether or not you believe in the literal accuracy of the Bardo teachings, the practice of reading to the dying embodies a profound compassion and recognition of death as a sacred transition rather than simply a medical failure. It represents humanity at its most caring, offering guidance and support even beyond the boundaries of physical life. Now we come to perhaps the most practical and immediately relevant aspect of the Tibetan Book of the Dead: how its teachings can transform our relationship with fear, not just fear of death, but fear in all its forms. The text presents fear as the primary obstacle to liberation, and its methods for working with fear offer profound tools for living with greater courage and freedom. The Bardo Thotl is remarkably direct about the role of fear in human suffering. It identifies fear as the force that causes consciousness to flee from its own enlightened nature, to reject opportunities for awakening, and to become trapped in cycles of suffering and rebirth. But more than just diagnosing the problem, the text provides specific methods for transforming fear into wisdom. The first and most fundamental insight is that fear arises from misunderstanding the nature of experience itself. When we believe that the appearances in our minds, whether thoughts, emotions, sensations, or perceptions, are solid, permanent, and ultimately real, we naturally become afraid of experiences that seem threatening. The text teaches that all appearances are actually empty. They arise and dissolve like reflections in a mirror or clouds in the sky, without solid, independent existence. This doesn't mean that experiences aren't vivid or meaningful. A reflection in a mirror can be crystal clear and beautiful, but it has no solid substance. Similarly, the text suggests that all our experiences, including our fears, are vivid appearances that arise in the space of awareness but have no ultimate solidity or permanence. Understanding this can radically transform how we relate to fear. Instead of seeing fear as a solid enemy that we must defeat or avoid, we can begin to see it as a temporary appearance in awareness, no more solid or permanent than a cloud passing through the sky. This doesn't make fear less intense when it arises, but it changes our relationship to the intensity. The text provides specific instructions for working with fear that can be applied immediately in daily life. When fear arises, instead of either fighting against it or being overwhelmed by it, the recommendation is to look directly at the fear itself. What is this fear made of? Where is it located? What happens if you don't immediately react, but simply observe the experience of fear with curiosity and awareness? Most people discover something surprising when they investigate fear directly. It's much more fluid and insubstantial than it initially appears. The solid, threatening presence that seems so overwhelming begins to reveal itself as a collection of sensations, thoughts, and emotions that are constantly changing. This direct investigation is one of the most powerful tools that text offers for working with fear. The Bardo Thotl also teaches that fear often arises from attachment to familiar patterns and resistance to change. We fear death because it represents the ultimate change, the complete letting go of everything familiar. But the text points out that we're actually experiencing many deaths constantly. It's the end of each moment, each breath, each experience. Learning to let go gracefully in small ways prepares us for the ultimate letting go. Try this practice. Notice how you cling to pleasant experiences, trying to make them last longer than they naturally would. Notice how you resist unpleasant experiences, trying to push them away or end them prematurely. Both clinging and resistance are forms of fear. Fear that we won't get what we want or that we'll get what we don't want. Practice letting experiences arise and dissolve naturally without interference. The text is particularly insightful about the fear of the unknown. Much of human anxiety stems from uncertainty about the future, about what will happen to us. The Bardo teachings suggest that this fear arises from the illusion that we ever truly control what happens to us. The text invites us to find peace in uncertainty itself, to discover the spacious freedom that comes from not knowing what comes next. This doesn't mean becoming passive or failing to make plans. It means holding our plans lightly, being prepared to adapt when circumstances change, and finding excitement rather than terror in the mystery of what unfolds. When you can be genuinely curious about uncertainty rather than afraid of it, you've taken a huge step toward the fearlessness that the text says is essential for liberation. One of the most profound teachings in the Bardo Thotl is that the things we fear most intensely are often our own unacknowledged potentials. The wrathful deities that appear in the second Bardo represent not just our fears and neuroses, but also our own power, wisdom, and transformative capacity appearing in forms that our ego finds threatening. Think about this in your own life. What qualities do you fear most in other people? What kinds of people make you most uncomfortable? Often, these represent aspects of yourself that you haven't integrated or accepted. The person who fears anger may have disowned their own power. The person who fears sadness may be avoiding their own depth and sensitivity. The text suggests that true fearlessness comes not from avoiding these challenging aspects of ourselves, but from recognizing them as parts of our own mind and learning to work with them skillfully. When you can face your own anger, sadness, power, or intensity without being overwhelmed, you develop the kind of psychological stability that remains unshaken even by the intense visions of the bardos. Another crucial insight is that fear often arises from the belief that we are separate, isolated individuals who must protect ourselves against a hostile world. The text challenges this fundamental assumption by pointing out that the boundary between self and other, between inner and outer, is much more fluid than we typically assume. When you recognize your deep inner connection with all life, many fears naturally dissolve. The practice of Tonglan that we discussed earlier is specifically designed to work with this fear of inner connection by deliberately taking on the suffering of others and sending out relief. You discover that you're much more resilient and spacious than you imagined. You also discover that helping others is one of the most effective ways to work with your own fears and limitations. The text also addresses the specific fear of death that haunts most people's lives. It suggests that death anxiety isn't really about death itself. It's about the fear of losing control, of letting go of our carefully constructed identity, of facing the unknown. By working with these fears in daily life, by practicing letting go in small ways, we can gradually reduce our death anxiety. Meditation on impermanence is presented as one of the most effective methods for working with death fear. When you regularly contemplate the fact that everything is temporary, your body, your relationships, your achievements, your problems, you begin to loosen your grip on these temporary appearances. This doesn't make life less precious. It often makes it more vivid and meaningful. The text is also practical about working with specific fears and phobias. It suggests that most intense fears are based on past experiences, either from this life or, according to Buddhist belief, from previous lives. The method for working with these fears is to gradually expose yourself to the feared situation while maintaining awareness, neither avoiding the fear nor being overwhelmed by it. This approach has been validated by modern psychology in techniques like exposure therapy and systematic desensitization. The key insight is that avoidance tends to strengthen fears while conscious, gradual exposure tends to reduce them. The Bardo Thotl adds the crucial element of maintaining awareness throughout the process. Perhaps most importantly, the text teaches that working with fear is not about becoming emotionless or invulnerable. It's about developing the capacity to remain aware and responsive even in the presence of intense experiences. True fearlessness isn't the absence of fear. It's the ability to act wisely and compassionately, even when fear is present. This kind of fearlessness is immediately practical in daily life. When you can remain aware and responsive in the presence of your fears, you make better decisions, communicate more effectively, and live with greater authenticity. You stop letting fear drive your choices and start living from wisdom and compassion. The ultimate goal of working with fear, according to the text, is to develop what's called confidence in emptiness. The recognition that no experience, no matter how intense or overwhelming, has the power to ultimately harm your essential nature. This confidence comes not from intellectual understanding, but from repeated experience of remaining aware in the midst of challenging situations. When you've developed this kind of confidence, the bardos themselves become opportunities rather than obstacles. Instead of fearing the intense visions and experiences that consciousness might encounter after death, you can approach them with curiosity and skillfulness. You've trained yourself to remain awake and aware no matter what arises. This transformation of fear into fearlessness is perhaps the most valuable gift that the Tibetan Book of the Dead offers to contemporary life. In a world filled with uncertainty, change, and challenge, the ability to remain aware and responsive in the presence of fear is an invaluable skill. It's a skill that serves you whether you believe in the literal teachings about the afterlife or not. The Tibetan Book of the Dead contains a teaching that might seem paradoxical at first. To truly live, you must learn to die. This doesn't mean becoming morbid or depressed about mortality. Instead, it means allowing the reality of death to awaken you to the preciousness and immediacy of life itself. When you truly understand that your time is limited and uncertain, everything changes. Think about how differently you would approach today if you knew with certainty that you had only 1 year left to live. What would suddenly seem important? What would become irrelevant? How would you treat the people in your life? What experiences would you prioritize? The contemplation of death doesn't diminish life. It reveals what's most essential about living. The Bardo Thodol presents death not as the opposite of life, but as life's greatest teacher. In Tibetan Buddhism, there's a practice called Maranasati, mindfulness of death, that involves regularly contemplating the inevitability, uncertainty, and implications of your own mortality. This isn't meant to create anxiety or depression. It's meant to create urgency about what truly matters. Here's a simple but powerful practice. Each morning when you wake up, remind yourself that this day is not guaranteed. You don't know if you'll be alive this evening. This isn't meant to create paranoia about safety, but rather to help you prioritize what's most important. Notice how this awareness affects your choices throughout the day. Do the things you normally worry about seem as crucial? Do you find yourself more present with the people you encounter? The text suggests that most people live as if they were immortal, constantly postponing the things that matter most. We tell ourselves we'll spend more time with family later. We'll pursue our creative projects when we have more time. We'll work on our spiritual development after we retire. The contemplation of death reveals the foolishness of this postponement. Later may never come. But this urgency isn't meant to create frantic rushing or desperate grasping. Instead, it's meant to create what the text calls wholesome urgency, a clear-eyed recognition of priorities that leads to more focused, intentional living. When you know your time is limited, you naturally become more selective about how you spend it. The Dalai Lama has spoken about how his daily contemplation of death makes him more compassionate and less concerned with trivial matters. He says that remembering mortality helps him treat each encounter as potentially his last interaction with that person, which naturally brings out more kindness and presence. This perspective can transform relationships in profound ways. When you remember that everyone you meet is also mortal, that you may never see them again, it becomes much harder to hold grudges or waste time on petty conflicts. The text suggests that the awareness of universal mortality naturally awakens compassion. We're all in the same situation, all facing the same fundamental uncertainty. The practice of living as if you're dying also reveals the difference between what's urgent and what's truly important. Many things that seem urgent in daily life, emails, deadlines, social obligations, are revealed as relatively trivial when viewed from the perspective of mortality. Meanwhile, things we often postpone, expressing love, pursuing meaning, developing wisdom, become clearly urgent. Try this experiment. Make a list of everything you think you have to do today. Then consider each item from the perspective of someone who has only a month left to live. How many of these tasks would still seem essential? This isn't meant to make you irresponsible, but to help you distinguish between genuine priorities and habits of busyness. The Bardo Thodol also teaches that the quality of your death is determined by how you live. If you spend your life in states of anger, fear, or confusion, these same states will likely dominate your death experience. If you cultivate peace, awareness, and compassion during life, these qualities will serve you at the time of death. This creates a powerful motivation for inner development. This doesn't mean trying to be perfect or suppressing difficult emotions. It means gradually developing the capacity to remain aware and responsive, even in challenging circumstances. Every time you choose awareness over reactivity, every time you respond with compassion instead of anger, you're preparing for the ultimate test of consciousness that death represents. The text presents an interesting paradox. Those who are most prepared for death often fear it least, and therefore live most fully. When you've made peace with your mortality, when you've prepared for death through spiritual practice and psychological development, you're free to engage life without the constant background anxiety that mortality creates for most people. This freedom from death anxiety can be incredibly liberating. Much of human behavior is driven by the attempt to create security and permanence in an inherently insecure and impermanent world. We accumulate possessions, achievements, and identities partly to create the illusion that we can somehow transcend mortality. When you accept mortality fully, this desperate grasping can relax, allowing for more spontaneous and authentic living. The contemplation of death also reveals the interconnectedness of all life. When you recognize that everyone and everything you love is temporary, you develop what Buddhists call precious human birth, appreciation, a recognition of how rare and valuable conscious existence is. This can lead to a profound sense of gratitude for the opportunity to be alive, aware, and capable of love and understanding. Consider how this perspective might change your relationship to your problems and challenges. When viewed from the perspective of someone who might not be alive next year, many difficulties seem less overwhelming. This doesn't mean becoming passive about genuine problems, but it does mean not letting temporary challenges eclipse the fundamental miracle of being conscious and alive. The text also suggests that preparing for death enhances your capacity to help others who are dying. In a culture that often avoids or denies death, being someone who can remain present and helpful during others' death processes is an incredibly valuable skill. By working with your own mortality, you develop the capacity to support others through their final transition without being overwhelmed by your own death anxiety. Healthcare workers who have integrated death contemplation into their lives often report being more effective at providing end-of-life care. They're less likely to avoid dying patients, more comfortable discussing death openly, and better able to provide the kind of calm, supportive presence that dying people most need. The practice of living as if you're dying also cultivates what the text calls spiritual urgency, the recognition that awakening to your true nature is not something you can postpone indefinitely. If consciousness continues after death, then your level of spiritual development at the time of death becomes crucial for navigating the bardos successfully. If death is simply the end, then this life becomes your only opportunity for awakening and service. Either way, the message is the same. Don't postpone your inner development. Don't wait for better circumstances, more time, or fewer distractions. The capacity for wisdom, compassion, and awareness that you develop now is what you'll have available when you need it most. This urgency extends to relationships as well. The text suggests that unresolved conflicts and unexpressed love create psychological baggage that consciousness carries into the bardos. By cleaning up your relationships while you're alive, forgiving old hurts, expressing appreciation, resolving conflicts, you prepare for death with less psychological weight. Think about the people in your life with whom you have unfinished business. What would you want to say to them if you knew you were dying? What appreciation have you not expressed? What forgiveness have you withheld? The contemplation of death can motivate you to address these issues now, rather than carrying regrets into your final moments. The practice also reveals the importance of developing a philosophy or framework for understanding life and death. People who approach death with clear, spiritual, or philosophical perspectives often have more peaceful death experiences. This doesn't mean you need to adopt any particular religious belief, but it does mean developing some understanding of what you think life means and how you want to approach its end. The Bardo Thotl offers one such framework. But the key is having some perspective that allows you to find meaning in both life and death. Without such a framework, death can seem like pure loss or meaningless termination. With a coherent philosophy, death can be integrated into a larger understanding of existence. Living as if you're dying also means taking seriously the question of legacy. What do you want to leave behind? How do you want to be remembered? What impact do you want your life to have? These questions can help guide daily choices and long-term planning. But the text suggests that the most important legacy is the consciousness you develop and the love you express. Material accomplishments and external achievements, while meaningful, are ultimately temporary. The awareness you cultivate and the compassion you embody have the potential to influence others long after your physical death. This perspective can be particularly healing for people who feel that their lives haven't been successful in conventional terms. The Bardo Thotl suggests that spiritual development and compassionate service are the most valuable accomplishments possible, regardless of external recognition or achievement. The practice of death contemplation also naturally leads to questions about what happens after death. While the text provides detailed maps of the Bardo experiences, it also emphasizes that the most important preparation is developing present moment awareness, whether consciousness continues after death or not. The capacity to remain aware and responsive in challenging circumstances is valuable both for living and dying. Perhaps most importantly, living as if you're dying can awaken what many spiritual traditions call beginner's mind, the recognition that you don't actually know what will happen next. That life is far more mysterious and unpredictable than your plans and assumptions suggest. It's not. Knowing can be frightening, but it can also be liberating. When you release the illusion of control over your future, you become more available to respond creatively to whatever actually arises. You develop resilience and adaptability. You learn to find excitement rather than terror in uncertainty. The text presents this as essential preparation for the Bardos, where consciousness encounters experiences that are completely outside normal frames of reference. If you've learned to be comfortable with not knowing during life, you'll be better prepared for the radical unknowns that death presents. Living as if you're dying doesn't mean becoming reckless or abandoning long-term planning. It means holding your plans lightly while investing fully in present moment experience. It means taking care of practical responsibilities while not postponing what matters most. It means preparing for the future while not sacrificing present opportunities for love, service, and awakening. This balance between urgency and patience, between accepting mortality and embracing life, is one of the most valuable skills that death contemplation can teach. It's a skill that serves you whether you live for decades more or die tomorrow. The ultimate message of living as if you're dying is that mortality, properly understood, doesn't diminish life. It illuminates it. When you truly accept that your time is limited and precious, every moment becomes an opportunity for awakening. Every encounter becomes a chance for love, and every day becomes a gift rather than an obligation. Now we're going to explore one of the most psychologically sophisticated aspects of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Its understanding of how the mind creates reality, both in life and in death. What makes this ancient text so remarkable is that it anticipated many insights about consciousness and projection that modern psychology has only recently discovered. The core psychological insight of the Bardo Thotl is that everything we experience in life, in dreams, and in the afterlife states is a projection of our own mind. This doesn't mean that external reality doesn't exist, but it does mean that our experience of reality is always filtered through our own consciousness, beliefs, expectations, and psychological patterns. Think about how this works in daily life. Two people can experience the exact same event, perhaps a conversation with a friend, and have completely different experiences of it. One person might feel supported and understood, while the other feels criticized and rejected. The external event is the same, but the internal interpretation creates entirely different realities. The Bardo Thotl takes this insight to its logical conclusion. If our experience of reality is so shaped by our mental projections during life, how much more would this be true in the afterlife states, where consciousness is no longer anchored by physical sensory input? In the Bardos, the text suggests consciousness becomes pure creativity, generating experiences based entirely on its own psychological content. This is why the peaceful and wrathful deities that appear in the second Bardo are described as projections of mind rather than external beings. They represent the contents of consciousness appearing in symbolic form. The peaceful deities embody our enlightened potentials, our capacity for wisdom, compassion, clarity, and love. The wrathful deities represent both our unresolved psychological material and our fierce wisdom, the power to cut through illusion and transform suffering. Carl Jung recognized this psychological sophistication when he wrote his commentary on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. He saw in these teachings a profound understanding of what he called the autonomous complexes of the unconscious mind, psychological patterns that can seem to have independent existence and power over us. Jung wrote, "The world of gods and spirits is truly nothing but the collective unconscious inside me." He understood that the deities described in the Bardo Thodol represented universal psychological patterns that exist within all human minds, what he called archetypes. But the Tibetan teaching goes beyond Jung's psychology in important ways. While Jung saw these archetypal figures as aspects of the psyche that need to be integrated, the Bardo Thodol presents them as empty appearances that need to be recognized as projections and released rather than grasped or integrated. This has profound implications for how we might work with our psychological patterns during life. Instead of trying to fix or improve our personality, the text suggests that we might recognize all psychological experiences, thoughts, emotions, reactions, as temporary appearances in awareness that arise and dissolve naturally without solid existence. Consider how this might change your relationship to your own emotions. Instead of identifying completely with your anger, you might recognize the anger as a temporary appearance in awareness. This doesn't suppress the emotion or make it less intense, but it changes your relationship to the intensity. The text provides specific instructions for working with projections during the Bardo experiences that can be applied to daily life psychological work. When consciousness encounters the peaceful deities, the instruction is, do not worship them as external gods. Do not grasp at their beauty. Recognize them as your own awareness and merge with them. Apply to positive experiences in life. This means appreciating beautiful experiences without clinging to them or trying to make them permanent. When you have a wonderful experience, perhaps a moment of love, beauty, or insight, you can appreciate it fully without grasping at it or becoming attached to having more such experiences. When consciousness encounters the wrathful deities, the instruction is, do not fear them. Do not flee from them. Do not fight against them. Recognize them as empty appearances of your own mind. Apply to challenging experiences in life. This means neither avoiding difficult emotions and situations nor being overwhelmed by them. When you encounter anger, fear, sadness, or other challenging states, you can experience them fully without being controlled by them or defining yourself through them. The text's understanding of projection also offers insights into interpersonal relationships. Much of what we see in other people, especially our strong reactions to them, reflects our own psychological material. The person who triggers your anger might be reflecting your own unacknowledged anger. The person whose confidence intimidates you might be reflecting your own disowned power. The Bardo teachings suggest that recognizing these projections doesn't mean that other people don't have their own independent existence and characteristics, but it does mean that your experience of other people is always filtered through your own psychological lens. By becoming aware of this filtering process, you can respond to others more clearly and compassionately. This has practical applications for conflict resolution and relationship healing. Instead of focusing entirely on changing the other person's behavior, you can examine what your reactions to them reveal about your own psychological patterns. This often leads to more productive and healing interactions. The text also presents a sophisticated understanding of how psychological patterns perpetuate themselves. In the third Bardo, consciousness is drawn toward rebirth based on its karmic patterns. is the accumulated psychological momentum from thoughts, emotions, and actions. This creates cycles where unresolved psychological material continues to generate similar experiences and reactions. Applied to understanding personal patterns, this suggests that our habitual ways of thinking and reacting tend to create circumstances that reinforce those same patterns. If you habitually approach life with fear, you're likely to notice and focus on threatening aspects of situations, which reinforces your fearful worldview. If you habitually approach life with curiosity and openness, you're more likely to notice opportunities and possibilities. The good news is that because these patterns are psychological rather than fixed external realities, they can be changed through awareness and conscious choice. Every time you choose to respond differently to a familiar trigger, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen new possibilities. The Bardo Thodol presents consciousness as fundamentally creative and flexible. The experiences that arise in the Bardos, no matter how vivid or convincing, are described as empty appearances. They seem real and solid, but have no ultimate substance. This same principle applies to our psychological experiences during life. Your thoughts and emotions, no matter how intense or persistent, are also empty appearances in awareness. They arise, display their characteristics, and dissolve naturally. Understanding this can create tremendous psychological freedom. You don't have to be controlled by your thoughts and emotions, even while experiencing them fully. This perspective has influenced modern therapeutic approaches like acceptance and commitment therapy and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which emphasize changing your relationship to thoughts and emotions rather than trying to eliminate or control them. The text also offers insights into the nature of identity and ego. In the Bardos, consciousness gradually releases its identification with the personality and body of the previous life, eventually moving toward a new incarnation. This process of ego dissolution and reformation is presented as natural and potentially liberating. During life, we can practice smaller versions of this ego flexibility, instead of defending a fixed self-image. We can remain open to growth and change. Instead of clinging to familiar identity patterns, we can explore new ways of being. This flexibility prepares consciousness for the ultimate ego dissolution that death represents. Perhaps most importantly, the psychological insights of the Bardo Thodol suggest that liberation is always possible because suffering is based on misunderstanding rather than external circumstances. No matter how challenging your psychological patterns or life circumstances, the possibility of recognizing the empty, projected nature of all appearances remains available. This doesn't mean that psychological healing is easy or that external circumstances don't matter, but it does suggest that even in the most difficult situations, there remains the possibility of finding the awareness that is not touched by temporary psychological states. The text presents this recognition, the ability to remain aware without being controlled by whatever arises in consciousness, as the key skill for navigating both life and death successfully. Whether you encounter peaceful or wrathful deities, pleasant or challenging experiences, the instruction remains the same. Recognize all appearances as projections of mind and rest in the awareness that recognizes them. This psychological wisdom is developed over centuries of intensive meditation and consciousness exploration, offers practical tools for anyone seeking greater mental freedom and emotional resilience. By understanding how your mind creates your experience of reality, you gain the power to create consciously, rather than simply react to whatever arises. We now arrive at one of the most mysterious and controversial aspects of the Tibetan Book of the Dead: its detailed descriptions of how consciousness transitions from one life to another through the process of reincarnation. Whether you believe in literal rebirth or interpret these teachings metaphorically, they offer profound insights into the nature of consciousness and continuity. The Bardo Thodol presents reincarnation not as a punishment or reward system, but as a natural process governed by the momentum of consciousness itself. According to these teachings, the thoughts, emotions, and actions of one lifetime create psychological patterns that continue beyond death, eventually drawing consciousness toward circumstances that match those patterns. Think of it like a river flowing toward the ocean. The river doesn't consciously choose its path, but its movement is determined by the landscape it encounters, the hills, valleys, and obstacles that direct its flow. Similarly, consciousness moves toward rebirth, guided by what Buddhists call karma, the accumulated psychological momentum from past actions and choices. But here's what makes this teaching psychologically sophisticated. Karma isn't presented as an external force or cosmic bookkeeping system. It's described as the natural tendency of consciousness to create experiences that match its habitual patterns. If you spend your life cultivating anger, you develop strong neural pathways and psychological habits around anger that would naturally influence your future experiences. The text describes the third bardo, the bardo of becoming, as the stage where this karmic momentum becomes active in determining rebirth. Consciousness, no longer anchored by a physical body, experiences intense attractions and aversions that pull it toward specific life circumstances. These attractions aren't random. They're described as being precisely matched to consciousness's psychological development and karmic patterns. A consciousness dominated by greed might be drawn toward wealthy but spiritually impoverished circumstances. A consciousness characterized by wisdom and compassion might be attracted to situations where it can serve others, even if those circumstances involve material hardship. The text provides remarkably detailed descriptions of this process. It describes how consciousness, in the bardo of becoming, sees visions of potential parents engaged in sexual intercourse. Instead of being repulsed by this imagery, consciousness feels attracted to specific couples based on karmic connections. The text even describes how the emotional reaction to these visions, whether feeling attracted to the male or female figure, influences the gender of the resulting incarnation. These descriptions might seem crude or overly literal to modern readers, but they can be understood as symbolic representations of how consciousness is drawn toward specific life circumstances. The parents might represent the conditions and opportunities that will shape the next phase of consciousness development. What's particularly interesting is how the text describes the role of choice in this process. While consciousness is strongly influenced by karmic momentum, it retains some degree of choice about which rebirth to accept. The instructions in the Bardo Thodol encourage consciousness to choose wisely. If you must take rebirth, choose parents who are virtuous and will provide opportunities for spiritual development. This suggests that even in the afterlife states, awareness and intention can influence outcomes. Consciousness that maintains clarity and positive intention, even while being drawn toward rebirth, can make better choices about its next incarnation. The text also describes the possibility of choosing rebirth as a tulku, a realized being who consciously takes birth to serve others. This represents the highest form of conscious rebirth, where an enlightened consciousness deliberately enters the cycle of birth and death to help other beings achieve liberation. Modern examples of this teaching can be found in the Tibetan tradition of recognizing reincarnate lamas, spiritual teachers who are believed to have consciously chosen their rebirth, and can be identified based on their recognition of objects and people from their previous lives. The current Dalai Lama is perhaps the most famous example. Having been recognized as the reincarnation of the previous Dalai Lama through this traditional process. Whether you accept these claims literally or not, they represent a fascinating model of consciousness as something that transcends individual lifetimes, while maintaining continuity of development and purpose. The reincarnation teachings also offer a unique perspective on justice and fairness in life. Instead of seeing life circumstances as randomly distributed or unfairly imposed by external forces, the text suggests that each being's situation reflects their own past choices and psychological development. This doesn't mean that people deserve their suffering, but it does suggest that current circumstances offer opportunities for the exact type of growth and healing that consciousness needs. This perspective can be both empowering and challenging. It's empowering because it suggests that you have more influence over your life circumstances than you might think, not just through your current choices, but through the psychological patterns you develop over time. It's challenging because it makes it harder to blame external circumstances entirely for your difficulties. The text is careful to avoid a simplistic interpretation of this teaching. It doesn't suggest that people with difficult circumstances are being punished for past misdeeds. Instead, it presents challenging situations as opportunities for spiritual development and the resolution of karmic patterns. Consider how this might apply to understanding your current life situation. Instead of seeing your circumstances as random or unfair, you might ask, what opportunities for growth and development do my current challenges offer? What psychological patterns or habitual reactions are being highlighted by my current situation? How might my response to these circumstances influence my future development? This doesn't mean accepting injustice or avoiding efforts to improve difficult situations, but it does suggest approaching life challenges as opportunities for consciousness development, rather than simply obstacles to overcome. The reincarnation teachings also provide a framework for understanding the continuity of psychological patterns across time. Many people report feeling drawn to certain places, activities, or types of people without clear explanation. The text suggests that these attractions might reflect connections from previous lives, psychological patterns, or relationships that transcend individual lifetimes. Modern research into consciousness has found some intriguing correlations with these traditional teachings. Studies of young children who report memories of previous lives, conducted by researchers like Dr. Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia, have documented thousands of cases where children provide detailed information about deceased individuals that they couldn't have learned through normal means. While these cases don't prove reincarnation, they do suggest that consciousness might have properties that transcend our current scientific understanding. The consistency of these reports across different cultures and the verifiable accuracy of many details makes them difficult to dismiss entirely. The text also addresses what happens to consciousness that doesn't take immediate rebirth. It describes various intermediate states where consciousness might remain for extended periods, experiencing different types of existence based on its psychological state and karmic patterns. These descriptions parallel reports from near-death experiences and mystical traditions around the world. Some consciousnesses are described as entering blissful states where they experience the fruits of their positive actions. Others might experience purification processes where negative karmic patterns are gradually dissolved. Still others might become trapped in confused or frightening states based on their psychological attachments and aversions. The key insight is that these various afterlife states are not permanent destinations but temporary experiences that eventually lead either to liberation or to rebirth. The goal is not to achieve a pleasant afterlife state, but to develop the awareness that transcends all temporary states. The reincarnation teachings ultimately serve the larger purpose of encouraging spiritual development in this lifetime. If consciousness continues beyond death and carries its psychological patterns into future existences, then the work you do now on developing wisdom, compassion, and awareness has implications far beyond your current life. This can create a sense of urgency about spiritual development, not because you'll be punished for failing to develop, but because the patterns you establish now will continue to influence your experience indefinitely. Every moment of mindfulness, every act of compassion, every step toward greater awareness becomes an investment in your consciousness's future development. At the same time, the text emphasizes that liberation from the entire cycle of rebirth is possible. The ultimate goal is not better rebirths, but the transcendence of all conditioned existence through the recognition of consciousness's true nature. This liberation can potentially be achieved in any lifetime, including this one, through sufficient spiritual development and the recognition of the clear light awareness that is your deepest essence. Whether you interpret these teachings literally or symbolically, they offer a powerful framework for understanding consciousness as something far more vast and continuous than the individual personality. They suggest that your deepest identity transcends any particular lifetime while maintaining meaningful continuity of development and purpose. This perspective can be profoundly liberating. It suggests that death is not the end of your story, but simply one chapter in a much larger narrative of consciousness evolution. It encourages you to think beyond the immediate concerns of this lifetime and consider the long-term development of wisdom and compassion. Most importantly, the reincarnation teachings remind us that consciousness is the most precious thing we possess, more valuable than any material acquisition, more significant than any external achievement. By understanding consciousness as something that continues beyond death, we're motivated to treat its development as our highest priority and most important responsibility. Now let's explore how the ancient wisdom of the Tibetan Book of the Dead can be practically applied in our contemporary world, where most people die in hospitals rather than monasteries, and where spiritual preparation for death has largely been replaced by medical intervention. How can these profound teachings be integrated into modern life and death care? The first step is understanding that death preparation doesn't begin when you receive a terminal diagnosis. According to the Bardo Thodol, your entire life is preparation for death. Every moment of awareness you cultivate, every practice of letting go, every experience of remaining calm in the midst of change is training for the ultimate transition. In traditional Tibetan culture, death preparation was woven into daily life from childhood. Children learned about impermanence and the Bardo states as naturally as they learned to walk and talk. In our death-denying culture, most people reach old age without any framework for understanding or preparing for their own mortality. But it's never too late to begin this preparation, whether you're 25 or 80. 5. Whether you're in perfect health or facing terminal illness, you can start cultivating the awareness and skills that will serve you at the time of death. The most fundamental practice is developing familiarity with your own awareness. This doesn't require years of intensive meditation retreat. It can begin with simple practices of noticing the awareness that notices your thoughts, emotions, and sensations. This awareness, which the Bardo Thodol calls the clear light, is what you are at the deepest level, beyond all temporary experiences and identities. Try this simple practice. Throughout your day, periodically pause and notice that you are aware, not what you're aware of, but the awareness itself. This awareness is present whether you're thinking or not thinking, whether you're happy or sad, whether you're healthy or sick. This is the same awareness that the text says shines most brightly at the moment of death. Another crucial practice is working with attachment and aversion, the grasping and pushing away that creates psychological suffering. The Bardo Thodol emphasizes that the ability to let go gracefully is essential for navigating the death process successfully. You can practice this letting go in small ways throughout your life. Practice with physical sensations. When you experience physical discomfort, instead of immediately trying to change your position or distract yourself, try staying with the sensation for a few moments without resistance. This builds your capacity to remain aware in the presence of discomfort. It's a skill that will be invaluable during the dying process. Practice with emotions. When strong emotions arise, instead of immediately acting on them or suppressing them, try observing them with curious awareness. Notice how emotions arise, peak, and dissolve naturally when you don't interfere with them. This develops the emotional stability that the text says is crucial for recognizing the clear light. Practice with thoughts. Notice how thoughts arise and dissolve in awareness without your active control. You don't create your thoughts, and you don't have to identify with them or be controlled by them. This recognition of the fluid, impermanent nature of mental activity prepares you for the dissolution of ordinary thinking that occurs at death. Modern death preparation can also benefit from the Bardo Thodol's emphasis on creating supportive environments for dying. In traditional Tibetan culture, dying people are surrounded by practitioners who can guide them through the death process using the instructions from the text. We can adapt this approach for contemporary situations. If you're facing your own death or supporting someone who is dying, consider creating what might be called a spiritual intensive care unit. This means surrounding the dying person with people who can remain calm and spiritually focused during the death process. It means playing spiritual music, reading meaningful texts, and maintaining an atmosphere of peace and spiritual focus. Many hospitals and hospice organizations are beginning to recognize the importance of spiritual support during the dying process. Some have developed programs where trained volunteers can provide spiritual guidance to dying patients, drawing on wisdom traditions like the Bardo Thotl while respecting patients' individual beliefs. Dr. Ira Byock, a palliative care physician, has written extensively about the importance of what he calls dying well. His research shows that people who approach death with spiritual preparation and support often have more peaceful death experiences and cause less trauma for their families. The text's emphasis on timing is also relevant for modern death preparation. The Bardo Thotl provides specific instructions for different stages of the dying process, recognizing that consciousness goes through predictable phases as it separates from the body. Understanding these phases can help both dying people and their supporters know what to expect. In the early stages of dying, when the person is still conscious and able to communicate, the focus should be on helping them remain calm and spiritually focused. This might involve guided meditation, prayer, or simply maintaining a peaceful presence. As the dying process progresses and ordinary consciousness begins to fade, the text recommends providing gentle reminders about the nature of the experiences that may be arising. Even if the person seems unconscious, the instructions suggest that they can still hear and benefit from spiritual guidance. Modern adaptations of these practices might involve creating personalized death preparation materials, recordings of meaningful spiritual teachings, letters from loved ones, or guided meditations specifically designed for the dying process. Some people create death playlists of music that holds deep spiritual significance for them. The text also emphasizes the importance of resolving unfinished business before death. This includes practical matters like wills and advance directives, but more importantly, it includes emotional and spiritual completion. The Bardo Thotl suggests that unresolved conflicts and unexpressed feelings can create psychological turbulence that interferes with peaceful dying. Modern death preparation might include practices like writing letters to important people in your life, having conversations you've been postponing, and working through forgiveness processes. Many hospice programs now include social workers and chaplains who help dying people complete these kinds of emotional and spiritual tasks. The teaching about the importance of guides during the death process can be adapted for contemporary situations. While most of us don't have access to trained lamas who can read the Bardo Thotl during our death process, we can train family members and friends to provide similar support. This might involve teaching loved ones about the stages of dying, helping them understand how to remain calm and supportive during the death process, and even training them to read spiritual passages aloud. During the final stages of life, the key is having people present who understand death as a spiritual process rather than simply a medical event. The text's insights about the continuation of consciousness after clinical death are also relevant for modern death care. Recent research suggests that brain activity can continue for several minutes after the heart stops, and some people report awareness during periods of clinical death. This suggests that the traditional practice of continuing to speak to and guide someone for a period after clinical death might be more than just symbolic comfort. Many modern death care providers now recommend continuing to treat the body with respect and continuing to provide spiritual guidance for some time after death appears to have occurred. Advanced directives can be expanded beyond medical decisions to include spiritual preferences. People can specify what kind of spiritual support they want during the dying process, what texts or music they want played, and how they want their body to be treated after death. Some people are also creating what might be called Bardo directives, specific instructions about how they want to be guided through the death process based on their understanding of the Bardo Thotl teachings. The text's emphasis on the importance of dying consciously is particularly relevant in an age of heavy medical intervention. While pain management is clearly important, the Bardo Thotl suggests that maintaining awareness during the dying process is crucial for navigating the Bardo successfully. This creates complex decisions about how much medication to use during dying. Some people choose to accept more discomfort in order to remain conscious during their final transition. Others prioritize comfort and trust that their spiritual preparation will serve them, regardless of their state of consciousness at death. Perhaps most importantly, the Bardo Thodol reminds us that death preparation is ultimately about life enhancement. The practices that prepare you for death, mindfulness, letting go, cultivating love and wisdom, are the same practices that make life more meaningful and joyful. By approaching death preparation not as a morbid preoccupation, but as a path to greater aliveness, we can integrate these ancient teachings into contemporary life in ways that serve both our living and our dying. The goal is not to become obsessed with death, but to become so comfortable with mortality that you're free to live with complete authenticity and courage.